Well, there's a couple of us, so let's get started, guys. So today is going to be the first class for this People for Poetry for the People workshop. I'm gonna do 5 total. I'm gonna do them on Thursday nights unless I get a request to do it at another time. That's better for other people. But I was hoping that this would be like a nice thing for people to do and give them something to work on in between classes as well. Like, you know, as I said in the initial post, it's like art is a healing thing. And I feel like a lot of people could use something like this. So I was trying to make something that, you know, could incentivize folks to be creative and maybe get out of their like worrisome mind. I know it kind of helps me a little bit. So that's sort of the impetus for the whole thing. And yeah, so that's the basic thing, a basic overview of the class. I'm gonna do 5 total. So the last one is the first week of May. You don't have to come to them all, and people can come in and out. So there might be new people who join us, you know, later on in the series. And if you guys fall off and need to take a week off, that's totally fine. It's cool, you know, just come back if you want to come back. It's all good, no pressure. Tonight's class is going to be about imagery. So this is a poetic concept. I'm going to focus all these classes largely on device, because I think that one of the things that people misconstrue about poetry is that it has no tools and it's just all talent, but that's not true. There's lots of tools. And I want to teach people some of those tools so that maybe they can take it into their own writing or their songwriting or whatever, you know. And feel free to interject, feel free to comment, feel free to do whatever. This is just like an open forum, you know what I mean? So yeah, feel free to do whatever you like. Interrupt me to ask me something or to have a comment, it's cool. So yeah, does anyone have any like idea maybe what imagery is? Do you guys have any like, have you heard of it before? Have you worked with it before, anybody?
I remember imagery from like college English class in high school and all that. And every review I've gotten of my work says I need to use more imagery.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay, well, this might be for you then. That's cool. Yeah, it's traditional in like English classes and stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about you, Ricky? Any experience with this device at all?
With imagery?
Yeah.
I mean, it's to basically paint a picture for themes, right?
It's to paint a picture in general. So that's pretty much the basis, you know. It's like, have you ever heard that thing, show, don't tell?
Yeah.
That's basically what it means, you know. It's like show, don't tell. So we're going to start with this concept. I'm going to go a little bit more in depth with it. And then we'll read a couple poems that exemplify imagery, that actually have some really good uses of imagery. And then we're going to do a short exercise. I'm going to actually give you guys the opportunity to do a short exercise. So if you have your computer up or a pen and paper or something like that, you know, that's going to be helpful during these classes. We're going to do this every week. I'm going to have this same sort of structure. Concept, poems to read, to elucidate concept, short exercise, workshop, then a prompt to help you out for the rest of the week, basically. So yeah, so let's get into the concept a little bit. The thing about imagery is that it's the same whether you talk about it in fiction or in poetry, but I think it's generally associated with fiction, like, because it's about using the 5 senses. So when you write a piece of fiction, usually, or nonfiction, or any kind of narrative, people are usually looking for these sensory things, you know. So the concept is to use smell, see, hear, touch, and taste to create very visceral descriptions of the things that are in the poem, if that makes sense. So you want to be able to have the reader be able to touch and taste and smell and hear and see all of these things. It creates this ability for them to be like really immersed in what you're discussing, what you're telling them. It's a really helpful tool to also express feeling without being like, I'm sad, or because there are objects that can convey that, right? Like a piece of rotten fruit. That's a little bit depressing, isn't it? Seeing a piece of rotten fruit. It's kind of like that kind of concept, right? Instead of telling them I'm sad or I'm depressed or whatever, or this is depressing, you show them what that looks like. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So let's elucidate this a little bit more. I'm going to share my screen with you guys, so I hope you all can see the screen share. I'm going to do this in just a second. Hold on. Present. So you guys should be able to see a poem now. Can you see a poem? Do you see a poem on your screen?
Switch to gallery view. Ooh, fun. I don't.
Nope.
You don't? Okay.
Just an Angela.
Hold on a second. Let me try a different mode. How about now?
Yep, there we go.
Okay, perfect. Great. All right. So I gotta get this. Oh, you guys are right there. Perfect. Okay. So this is a poem that was written by, I'm gonna give you a little bit of background here why I chose this one specifically, because imagery is used in a lot of poems, but my first undergraduate poetry workshop instructor was Judith Hemschmeyer, the person who wrote this poem. And she was my favorite teacher, and she used to tell me things like, what's more impactful, the word fuck or the word fornicate? And she was like 70. And I used to love hearing her say this shit. Besides the fact that she's a really, really great poet. And the anthology that I pulled this from is alongside of a lot of really famous poets from the 20th century, like Elizabeth Bishop and Frank O'Hara and all these other people. So let's read this one. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna read it. I'm gonna read it to you guys follow along. And what I want you to catalog in your head is where the imagery is. After we read the poem, we're gonna call out some of the things that we can touch, taste, see, hear, and smell. Yeah?
Okay.
Cool.
Works for me.
Okay, so the poem is called, I Remember the Room Was Filled with Light. They were young. Let's start over again. They were still young, younger than I am now. I remember the room was filled with light and moving air. I was watching him pick brass silvers from his hands as he did each night after work. Bits of brass gleamed on his brow. She was making supper. I stood on the rim of a wound just healing. So when he looked up and asked me when we were going to eat, I ran to her, though she could hear. She smiled and said, tell him, then tell her. On winged feet, I danced between them, forgiveness in my cup, wise messenger of the gods, their child. So first, what do you guys think is happening inside this poem? She's telling a story. What's the story?
I think it has something to do with the narrator's parents.
Yes. What are the parents doing?
The dad is grabbing brass slivers from his hands, and the mom's making dinner.
Yeah,
So
and then what happens at the end there? What is she doing? What's the kid doing?
Wise messenger of the gods, their child. On her winged feet. He's
Asking when they're gonna eat.
Yeah, but why? Why is the kid going back and forth between the parents? Why is she carrying messages?
Oh. Huh.
When they're all in the same room, what could possibly be happening here?
Distant.
Yeah.
What was that? Yeah.
Distant.
Yeah, and maybe a fight. Okay, so Ananda, basically what we were doing is we were looking at this poem here. I had read it, and we were talking about what was happening in the poem, and we were also talking about things that from the poem that we can touch, taste, see, smell, and hear. So, as I had, where we left off was that clearly something's happening between the parents, and the kids are, the kid is helping them in some way. And we deduced that what is happening in the poem is that the child is trying to help them make up after a fight by carrying messages back and forth between the parents. So that's where we left off, right, guys?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now I want to just go into the poem a little deeper. What are things that are really vivid to you from this poem? Like words that stick out that you can clearly see, the images you can clearly see in your head from the piece.
The brass livers line really sticks out to me.
Yeah. Why?
Because I have had to pick out a lot of metal splinters out of my fingers lately with the whole luthier stuff that I've been doing.
Okay. So you have like, there's like a sensory thing for that for you because you actually have that experience.
Yes.
Cool. Anybody else?
The line that says, instead tell him ... then tell her on winged feet. Like, in my mind, I just see kid going back and forth saying, mom said this, dad said this, mom said this.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Like, I have had that experience before. You have like two parents who aren't talking, and they're like, tell him I said this, and she's like, tell him I said that. I can see that one pretty vividly too. Yeah. I think, for me, I'm trying to see like which piece is the most vivid to me. I also think the brass silvers is probably the thing that sticks out to me the most. Just this image of a man like plucking these little metal shards out of his brow and this gleaming, the light refraction. You can see this kind of like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
These are the kinds of things sorry, go ahead, Ananda.
I said it's a really elegant way of indicating that there was a fight, like brass slivers, like, there was shots fired and little bits of it are left over.
Yeah, there's tension there.
Yeah, I had to reread to really catch that tension. But for me, the line that really caught me and landed me in the feel of it was, she was making stupor. I stood on the rim of her wound just healing. And
yeah,
I
feel that one.
I love that she was placed, in such a plain, she's just going about the day and I'm standing in this completely alien experience.
Right.
That one really brought me more into the, I like that juxtaposition.
Yes, me too. I do too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's move on to the next one. There's one more poem because each of these poets kind of use, this is why I'm going to show you guys another one. It's because each of these poets sort of use imagery in a different way, whereas Hemschmeyer is extremely concise with her imagery. Sharon Olds, who wrote this poem, Adolescence, is extremely verbose. Her descriptions are fat. They're not thin, if that makes sense. They're extreme. So I want to read this one, and we're going to talk about what's happening in the poem first, and then we'll talk about where we see those images. So the poem's called Adolescence.
Do you want to go
apologize
sit in
for
your hammock
interrupting.
for a minute or two?
What's up, Cody?
But would you mind hitting full screen real quick?
Sure. Yeah, let me go to present on this. Hold on, I have to move this away. Okay. Yeah.
There it is. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so adolescence. When I think of my adolescence, I think of the bathroom of that seedy hotel in San Francisco where my boyfriend would take me. I had never seen a bathroom like that. No curtains, no towels, no mirror, just a sink green with grime and a toilet yellow and rust-colored, like something in a science experiment, growing the plague in bowls. Sex was still a crime then. I'd sign out of my college dorm to a false destination, sign into the flop house under a false name, go down the hall to the one bathroom and lock myself in. And I could not learn to get that diaphragm in. I'd decorate it like a cake with glistening spermicide and lean over, and it would leap from my fingers and sail into a corner to land in a concave depression like a rat's nest. I'd bend and pluck it out and wash it down to that fragile dome. I'd frost it again till it was shimmering and bend it into its little arc and it would fly through the air, rim humming like Saturn's rings. I would bow down and crawl to retrieve it. When I think of being 18, that's what I see. That brimmed disc floating through the air and descending. I see myself kneeling, reaching for my life.
Wow.
Interesting.
What's happening in this poem?
She's
I feel like I'm back in high school reading a William Blake poem right now.
What's she doing?
well, she's, having sex with her boyfriend, but in this
Right.
like a grungy bathroom because it's the only place where they can meet up. And she's like doing everything she can to do it right, but it's still like it keeps slipping out of her fingers and it keeps slipping out of her fingers.
What is it? What's it, right? What is it?
Well,
I know
The
you
diaphragm.
can't- Thank you.
I think
Thank
it's it's like the diaphragm, but at
Right.
the same time it's kind of a metaphor for her life in
Yes.
like she's doing her best to interact and to do these things she's interested in, but it's criminal and she has to go to like really grungy like extremes in order to do it. Yeah.
So and so like we can kind of see this woman grappling with an item with this diaphragm, and it reminds her of adolescence. So this is like we're not there yet, but this is like an extended metaphor. But at the same time, there are these extremely well-placed images just packed deep into this poem, right? So what are the things that you can clearly see happening or smell or feel or whatever?
The decorating the diaphragm like a cake with glistening spermicide
That was mine
was
too.
so realistic that I was starting to gag a bit.
Yeah, it's rough, huh?
Oh yeah.
You ready? Ready for books? All done with your hammock?
Yeah. And so
All right, my friends. I'm
that's
sorry.
cool.
I've got to bump out quick. This was great. Please keep doing this. I'm really, really looking forward to this. And hopefully I can game the day out a little bit better before
Sure, no
next time.
problem, Nanda. Thank you for joining us for a little bit.
Yeah. Enjoy, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Mom,
Yeah,
what
baby.
land were you guys talking?
Aw.
So anybody else have like a thing that they can clearly see that just sticks out at them? The icing on the diaphragm, that is definitely one of them.
Wash it down to the fragile dome where it's frosted again until it's shimmering. Well, when she
Go
keeps referring to it, she keeps referring to his dick. But she keeps saying it. I see it like a lot through this poem. And
What do you think the pronoun is referring to in the poem? It. Both of you. That's a question for both of you.
I'm reading it as it, especially once it starts happening like halfway through. It is referring to the diaphragm a lot because that's kind of turns into the subject.
Right. Yes. We're focused on this fucking little thing, right?
Ah.
Yeah. And I'm just picking out little sections here. I'd never seen a bathroom like that. No curtains, no towels, no mirror, just a sink, green with grime, and a toilet, yellow and rust colored. Forget the metaphor that comes afterwards. Those 4 lines, that's packed. She describes in detail, in just 4 lines, this disgusting bathroom to the point where you can clearly see it. You can clearly see what's happening in this bathroom.
Mhm.
If you go further down, there's some narrative here, like the false name, and then she talks about going down to the bathroom, and then we start talking about this diaphragm, and then you get a shit ton of imagery. I think my favorite one is the one where she talks, it's like down at the bottom, I'd frost it again till it was shimmering and bend it into its little arc. So for women, I don't know if you guys have ever seen a woman put a diaphragm in, it's like, they have to squeeze this thing into like an oval shape to get it in there. So every time she does it with the spermicide, she like bends it into an arc. It flies out of her fingers, which is the rest of this. It's like bend it into its little arc and it would fly through the air. Just that image of this diaphragm. It makes me laugh. It's like,
it is a little funny.
Yeah, it is very comical, flying through the air, and then an image of her getting on the floor and crawling around to find it, right? So like if we break this poem down into its little pieces, it's really just a lot of images. There's not really much else. And if you go back to Hemschmeyer's poem, it's pretty similar. There's narrative in there, and then the images are layered in. Hemschmeyer's is a little bit more concise in the way that she gives you her imagery, and this one is a little bit more flamboyant in how she presents what she's, but it has to do with the tone of the poem. So think about the fact that the last poem was about a fight. So there's tension, so we're gonna have shorter, more concise descriptions and imagery. And this one is like about adolescence, which is a rambling, crazy, nonsensical time. And so all of this wild sort of rambling imagery works for that time in someone's life. You know what I mean? So it also contributes to the tone of the poem a little bit. So do you guys kind of understand how imagery can be used in a poem? Like you understand how to create a little bit of a visual, or it's not even just a visual, but the texture of something, or like the smell of something. It can be anything, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so we're gonna do a little exercise now. So basically what I would like you guys to do is, if you have like a sheet of paper or a notepad on your phone, or on your computer, whatever, we're gonna do something called writing from your life. This is a little exercise that we're gonna do. So when you guys are ready, we can start this one. So this is pretty short. Writing from your life is the concept of an idea that you can take imagery from your real life and turn it into something that has poetic form. And if you notice from both of the two poems that I showed you before, that's exactly what has happened in those two pieces. They're taking these things from their real life and they're turning them into these vivid images that convey something to the reader, right? So we're going to start with just that. There's no long form poem here. So this exercise says, make a one-word list of things you can see, smell, hear, touch, or taste right now in your room. Once you have at least 3 one-word items on your list, go back to the list and pick one and develop the description to make it a little more tangible for the reader or the listener. So there's an example here. Use physical descriptions instead of veering off into how something makes you feel. For example, painting, which you can see behind me, right? It's not that one. It's actually the one that was over there. But painting could become the acrylic portrait framed in gold painted wood hung squarely on the wall behind my makeshift desk. Do you see the difference there? One is just this one object, but then when we add all this description around it, we have a little bit more of a clear picture. So I want you guys to take a few minutes and do that. I'm gonna give you guys like 5 minutes or so to make your one-word list, and just pick one, and don't be too critical of yourselves. Just write some descriptions down for one of those. I'm gonna give you guys a few minutes to do that, okay? And I think I'm gonna do it too.
Hell yeah.
You have a question, Cody?
No, I was saying hell yeah to you doing it as well.
Okay. How we doing, guys?
I think I'm done.
Almost done.
Cool. I'll give you a couple more minutes.
Ooh. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna stop where I'm at.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, well, does anyone want to share their 3-word list and the description that they wrote?
I'll go.
Okay, go, Cody.
So slightly immaturish, but right when you said all of that, I had a really bad burp that kind of was lingering. So went with the burp, the couch
Okay.
I'm sitting on, the test next to me, the frog stuffed animal she has in her lap, and our Switch.
Okay.
So I went with the burp because I'm a child, but also that seems like it'd be the more fun to try to make all flowy and poetry and such. So I went with remnants of the late supper, clinging to the tongue, brought forth by an airy disturbance whose charge was led by a room temperature cola, drank to calm caffeine-induced anxiety.
I like it.
That's pretty cool. I like that. That's fun. That's very fun. I'm glad that you went with probably a lesser used sense, which is kind of like smell, right? Right?
Yeah.
I like that. I think that's cool. And I like the kind of like brought forth by a cola, blah, blah, blah. That sounded really fun. That was cool. That was a good description, Cody. Really nice. Ricky, do you have one you want to share?
Sure.
Okay.
I got lights, shadows, and stone.
Cool. So which one did you pick?
Oh, I started with this. I wrote a glow reflecting off my mirror, dancing shadows keeping pace with the wind against my neck, and that's as far as I got.
That's really, really nice. I really like that one. I can
Thank
clearly
you.
see the globe reflecting off the mirror. That's a very concrete image to me. I can clearly see that.
Mhm.
And the wind going against the back of your neck. I can feel that. I like that. You kind of like coupled those together. It was really nice.
Yeah, I looked at the mirror and I saw my fan, and I'm like, huh.
That's
'Cause,
perfect. But isn't it strange? These simple things can turn into something like that creates a mood.
ethereal.
Yeah, it's kind of fun, right?
I like it.
Yeah, so I came up with a little list. Mine is cat, poster, and air conditioner. And I went with poster. And mine is very, very basic, very simple. It just says, the poster made mostly of purples and pinks, the word Babe Fest scrawled across it in 70s bubble letters. That's it.
Nice.
So, and I just want to reiterate here that, it's not necessary to be flowery in any way. Like if you looked at the last 2 pieces, they're not flowery. And when I say flowery, I mean they don't follow the typical like Lord Byron, oh, you and thou, you know what I mean? This very very old style diction. And I study 20th century poetry. Those 2 poets are 20th century poets, and most 20th century poetry is very based in concrete descriptions. And so imagery is the best way to get those concrete descriptions. So you both did great. So I want to move on from this concept, and I'm just going to read this really quick because this is kind of the basis of this workshop in general. Sorry, I need
Can
to
I ask a quick question?
Yes, Cody, please.
This is just a total ADD thing. We just blow past it if you want to. But was there a similar lead-in to like the fact that a lot of the poetry in the 20th century was getting a lot more concrete and less flowy, flowery, similar to how the flow was that led into the brutalism brutalism art movement kind of situation, just boiling it down to its bare essentials?
Yeah, so essentially it's just a desire to not be so unreachable with your descriptions, like the same kind of idea of, you know, function and form. So a lot of art in general, I'm trying to find my mouse, I'm sorry. A lot of art in general follows that rule, and it's really a 20th century rule, this concept of form and function, so that everything that you're using in a poem has a purpose. And I think that is kind of what led them to go that direction. Plus, I think that poetry tends to be this sort of like, people think it's this like highbrow art form because of all those thou and those and the poets of, you know what I mean, like Emily Dickinson and that sort of tradition. But real poetry is, that's cute. Somebody draw a happy face.
Everybody can see that. Okay, never mind.
Okay, it was really cute. Yeah, so like, I don't know. I just think they wanted to make it more accessible. Like Bukowski. Bukowski is probably the most like accessible poet of the 20th century, simply because he really didn't use a lot of flowery language, just very simple wording, extreme concrete descriptions, and that's just how it's been ever since. And except for maybe like the experimental poets, which if we do a level 2 series of this workshop, I'll get into some of the more like wild and wacky things from the 20th century. So anyone else have anything they want to say, add? Good?
No.
Okay. So this is from a book that I use quite often for myself. It has poetry prompts in it. And if you guys like to use writing prompts, I recommend them. And if you like to use them, I recommend this book. It's called The Practice of Poetry. You can get it like on eBay for really, really, not eBay. What am I, 100? You can get it on Amazon for like, $3 or something, like a used copy of it. So this is the foreword from that book. Poetry, like any art, requires practice. It's easy for us to accept the idea of practice when we think of a painter's figure studies or the sounds coming from the hives of practice rooms in a conservatory. But since we consider ourselves already fluent in language, we may imagine that talent is the only requirement for writing poetry. Talent certainly is essential. I disagree. But so are curiosity, determination, and the willingness to learn from others. Writing is solitary work, but most poets would argue, as they have here in exercise after exercise, that the aspiring poet must apprentice him or herself, must master the elements of language, the complexities of form and its relation to subject, the feel of the line, the image, the sound of play of sound that make it possible to respond in a voice with subtlety and range when he hears that music in his inner ear, or she sees in the world that image that sparks, that's the spark of a poem. So essentially, this is just to reiterate that poetry, like any other art form, is a practice. You become a better artist by doing art and learning about the techniques in art. Same thing is true about writing. Same thing is true about music. And when we talk about the concept of talent, this is like why I point this out, is because I don't necessarily believe that talent is an essential key. I think that if somebody works hard enough to grow themselves as an artist, whatever the form, that they will eventually develop the talent. I think talent is kind of like, you can have it or you cannot have it, but it doesn't really determine whether or not you're going to be good at what you do. That's how I feel. How hard you work at your craft is going to determine how good you are at what you do. So that's kind of what this workshop is about. Anyone have any thoughts, comments?
I actually go ahead, Ricky.
I was just saying I agree. It's like not so much like the talented person who doesn't practice will be behind the person that's not talented that does practice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree 100%.
I actually just had a conversation with my friend Matthew, like at 4:00 today. And he's a published poet and everything, so that kind of whatever, side tangent on a side tangent. But we were actually talking about like getting through writer's block and everything. And a concept that I've been like really like following through with after like reading about John Darnielle of the Mountain Goats, Willie Nelson, and Stephen King, all just like going through and you just write to write as like a concept, and like really just steamrolling through writer's block, lack of thought, the inability or lack of talent thereof that some people would consider they have, and just be like 200 words, call it a day, but those 200 words no matter what. And connected to the phrase, because like talent and practice, not so much a thing as much as just hard brute force and work to get through it. Personally, I find works well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's why I recommend prompt books. So especially for songwriters like yourself, Cody, who may be struggling, like, I just can't finish these lyrics. It might be good to just pick up a random, not for the purpose of writing the lyrics specifically even, but just pick up a random prompt or go online and find a writing prompt and just do it. Because if you do something else, you might get somewhere else. And also it exercises the muscle, which is exactly what you're talking about. It's just exercising the muscle. I used to tell my students when I taught English, like 101, Comp 101, and all the kids that were students who hated writing, they would always be like, you know, they would say like, I can't write, I can't. And I would be like, okay, we'll start with free writing, and I want you to write all that stuff down. Write down all that stuff. I can't do it. I hate this. I hate Miss Patain. I hate everything. I don't care, because eventually your brain is going to get tired of that and you're going to write something else. Yeah. You'll have gone over that hump of I can't, I don't want to, into maybe I will. Maybe this isn't as hard as I thought. And it used to work for them. A lot of them did say that, yeah, that actually does work, because it's a personal resistance sometimes more so than it is a real block, if that makes sense.
One of the opening line on the last EP I did last year was literally built out of a free write, and it's literally the line, I don't know what's left to say, doesn't matter anyway, besides it all just comes out the same. Because it was literally just a free write, and I just started to write how much I hated the fact that I had writer's block. And like, it's objectively one of my better performing songs right now.
Wonderful. So it means that like, even when we think we can't write, sometimes a gem falls out. You never know. If you write 200 lines and you've got one great one, you've done a good job. That's what I think. So let's move on to the next one. So I'm going to close the PowerPoint after this. I just want you guys to be able to see the workshop process. So this is how we're going to do this. So I realize that there is only a couple of us now. I'm hoping that that will change, and we'll have a few more, and we'll have the ability to workshop a few people's work other than just the 3 of our own. But this is how it's going to go. So we're trying to workshop a poem a week, and this could also be lyrics for a song. It could be a free write. It could be anything. You know, it doesn't have to be this finished, completed thing. Just, you know, someone will volunteer to be the person who brings the poem next time, and we will workshop it together. What that kind of looks like is this. So for yourself, I want you to upload it to a link sharing platform like Google Drive or Dropbox, so that when you get into the class, you can drop the link to your poem in the chat. And then everybody can click the link and open it, and we'll all be able to read the poem on the page, right? Okay. And then the poet, whoever is the author, is going to read the piece aloud, and we are going to listen, and we will spend a few minutes giving feedback after the poet reads the work. Feedback should be constructive, of course. We want to make sure that we're offering criticism that's helpful to the revision process. And I will start the round, and then we'll have other people contribute. While the critique is happening, the poet is not allowed to speak. So I may mute the poet at that point, so that if they want to express themselves, they can, but that we won't hear them. So the poet has to stay quiet, and because we don't want, the reason why we do this is a couple reasons. The first one is that we don't want the poet tainting our perception of what's written, because it's important that the poet gets the third person perspective of what is actually being communicated in the poem versus their intention with the writing. Does that make sense? So what we're trying to do here is just make sure that what's on the page is what you mean to convey, which is why the poet doesn't speak. Make sense?
Makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, are we wanting to try this today?
If you want, we could. If you have something that you'd like to, we can do like a demo round.
I am literally scrolling through all my songwriting notebooks right now, trying to find like the song that I've been like the chorus has been like just in my head and not going right.
Well, do you have it digitized already for us?
If I can find it, yes. If not, no worries.
Well, what we could do is you could be our first volunteer next week, Cody. Are you going to be able to come back next week?
Yeah, it should be. No worries.
Okay, so why don't we make you our first victim? How does that sound?
Works for me.
Okay, so just digitize, or if it isn't digitized, just make sure you know where it is, and then when we do this workshop next week, we'll just,
Okay.
And the workshop will happen at the end of each class too. We'll go through a device, we'll look at some poems, we'll do this kind of same thing, do a little exercise for that particular topic, and then we'll do the workshop. And it says the workshop will be 20 minutes, but it's really going to be based on what the class feels like giving. Does that make sense? It could go a little shorter depending on the work. It could go a little longer depending on how many people we have in the workshop. So it just depends, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I am also going to allow the poet at the end of the workshop to ask some questions. So once we're done with the feedback round and we've like kind of hashed everything out, the poet is allowed to say, okay, well, can I ask you guys some questions? And then ask some questions about the work. If we haven't already answered all the questions that the poet has about the work, or questions arise as we're workshopping, they're more than welcome at the end to ask those questions, and we'll have a conversation at that point about the poem. Does that make sense? So the poet does get to talk about their work. I just don't want it to influence the feedback, so they do it after. Cool?
Yeah. Sounds cool.
Cool. Okay. Well, that's the process. So Cody is going to be our person for next week. I hope you guys are both here. And I hope we have a couple more people, but I'm really glad that you guys are here. I think it's nice and quaint to have like a small situation,
Yeah.
So, anybody have any questions about the workshop process?
No, it seems very straightforward, and I dig the way that you have it set up.
I like it too.
Sweet. Okay, cool. Well, I hope you guys will return next week. I'm gonna make sure I don't have anything else I wanna. Oh yeah, so your prompt. So this is your prompt that you can work with this week if you like. It's not mandatory to bring the writing that you do for these prompts back next week. This is for you. So if you want to continue on with the exercise that we did today in class, you can take this part 2 and really form something out of one of those descriptions. So it says, take at least one of the descriptions written during class today in part 1 of the exercise and use it to write a poem of at least 8 lines. So, and you can choose something else off your list or do something totally different. But if you wanted to try to actually take that image and write something based off of it, this will give you the opportunity to do that. And if you want to share it in a later workshop, that's also cool. But if not, that's cool too. It's all up to you guys. I am going to drop this slideshow into the drive. I'm sorry, into the chat. That's the word I'm looking for. Into the chat so that you guys have it in case you ever want to go back to it for any reason. So yeah.
Cool.
So next week we are going to, and I'm gonna make this big again. I'm sorry. I forgot about this last slide here. Move. There we go.
Okay.
So the next class we're going to do is next week on the 16th at 8. We're going to talk about simile and metaphor, and I know that sounds super basic, but to be honest with you, there's a lot of different types of similes and metaphors. We're going to review a couple of the different types that there are and just talk about them and look at them in some works. And then we'll do our first workshop. Yeah?
Yeah.
Sounds like a plan.
Cool. Well, I'm really excited about this. I think you guys are super cool for joining me, and I really, really appreciate it. And I think it's going to be a fun few weeks. I hope you guys can make it back to see me.
Definitely.
Sweet.
Absolutely.